And starting in 21, I started bringing lawsuits against everybody, against mandates. And that was my mission.
Explain that.
Yes. So they started bringing out the shots for kids. And we sued to stop that.
Sued who?
That specific lawsuit was probably the CDC. I've brought so many, it's hard to recall. That was our very first one in May of 21.
Yeah, and what possible justification
There's
was
none.
for that?
I'm still bitter.
Well, part of the reason I presume that you were so terrified of the mandates, apart from the sociological effects that you described, is that enforced medical treatment, well, first of all, that violates the Geneva Convention in a major way and for good reason. But it's worse than that. And we haven't seen this all play out yet. Like, typical people whose eyes are open no longer trust physicians or public health. That's a catastrophe. Because it means, to the degree that that was a viable enterprise, which was quite substantive for quite a long time, that's all that trust has to be reestablished. And I suspect it probably won't be. So I have no idea what the consequence of that's going to be.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. So there's so much to say here. Public Health 101 says you don't inoculate in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. Public Health 101 never held that you inoculate everybody. It was always the high-risk group, and you let it kind of travel through the society, and the lower-risk group, like the kids, kind of spread it, and then grandma, maybe you inoculate grandma. Everything was thrown out the window. And so the trust should be lost from the public health because they completely sold out the public.
Right.
They completely sold out the public.
Well, and we don't even know how bad yet.
Oh, it's, I think trust in doctors went from 70 or 80% to 40%. And I think that that's completely appropriate. So in May of 21, they start saying that they want to bring the shots out to the kids. Now, this is horrific. Why? Because kids were not dying from SARS. In fact, by the CDC's own numbers, children...
Well, it still says on your Wikipedia page that you're spreading misinformation about the fact that children don't die from COVID. And yet they don't. And that's very well established.
Very well established.
What, it's as risky for a child as the typical cold, I presume. It's something, those are basically the numbers. And what, the average person who died from COVID had like 5 major comorbidities and was older than the average age of death. Right, Jesus.
Right, they had an average of 4 comorbidities, and it was like 77. Age of longevity was like 76.
Yeah,
it was criminal, and it was very criminal to do it to the kids. And we were
that was inexcusable.
Why are they doing it to the kids? So that there's a whole financial motive, which is if you put it on the vaccine schedule, there's a lot of money involved, et cetera. But we fought that very hard, and I'm pretty proud because we brought that lawsuit in May of 21, and we had been told that they were probably going to release it right around May or June. So we worked really hard to get it out. And in fact, they didn't release the shots to the kids until a few months later. So I know we delayed it by a few months. Nonetheless, the moment they rolled it out, you asked why they did it. As soon as the shots were legally able to be given to kids, you then in America saw local jurisdictions that took the power from the parents and gave it to the kids. So if a kid wanted to get a shot, but the parents were awake and didn't want to get the shot, the kid was able to get the shot themselves. I think the age was 14 in certain local jurisdictions. That became very clear that this was Marxism, which is to take away the parental rights and give them to the state. The state was subbing in for the parents. Now, that's never happened in America before. In America, the parent has a
So why would you leap to Marxism as an explanation for that? Because that's a big leap. I'm not disputing it, but it's a very big leap.
Fascism, maybe not. I think of Marxism and fascism as the same. I would say that I was influenced a little bit by my father growing up in a communist nation. So in Russia... So in Russia, a child who went to school, they're 13 years old, might come home from school one day and tell their mom, oh, the dentist pulled 2 teeth today. In other words, the parent wasn't involved in the decision.
Well, and the kids there were invited to inform on their parents too. And it's part of classic Marxist doctrine that the familial structure should be decimated and that it's fine for... And the Russians made heroes of children who informed on their parents.
So how...
But to see that playing out in the United States and to attribute that...
Well, it's obvious. You asked me how I thought, because it only took 2 weeks. So in other words, the CDC said you could give it to 14-year-old kids, and then 2 weeks later, San Francisco and I think Baltimore, but there was a few jurisdictions that allowed 14-year-olds to do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, isn't that nifty?
Right.
Parents are expendable now.
Yeah.
That's why I said it's Marxist, because you're separating the parent from the child. That was...
On the ground, it's obviously being prepared for moves like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that I felt that, and then I kept, even though we couldn't stop the shots. I was very hell-bent on stopping mandates. So we sued the Department of Defense, we sued UCLA, we sued on behalf of the COVID recovered soldier, the COVID recovered college kid. They were saying ludicrous things like natural immunity didn't work.
Yeah, right.
So we had these like really robust arguments. That's when I learned that judges were really just also quite incurious, and judges were very afraid, I think, to even look at what we were writing. I know that because one of our best lawsuits...
Well, they're not accustomed to having to adjudicate disputes between, like, profound disputes between credible physicians, right? I mean, you can't expect judges to be able... You know what I mean? The judgments are going to stay intact as long as the physicians are basically playing a straight game. And all of a sudden now everything's thrown up in the air. You can't even trust the damn journals.
But from a status quo perspective, a judge's natural tendency is to keep the status quo.
Yes. Well,
right?
Depends on the judge.
Well,
right?
no, but
Depends
I'm saying
on how progressive they are.
Or in medicine, it's to be risk averse.
Yeah.
Most doctors were telling
no harm.
And they were telling pregnant women, you know, don't take a bite of sushi, don't have a smoke, don't drink a glass of wine.
Right.
But all of a sudden, roll up your sleeves and take the new stuff. I'd never seen that in my career. You didn't have doctors saying that. It was bizarre. I thought it was like, you know, invasion of the body snatchers. It made no sense. It was completely the opposite of how doctors usually acted. And then when we went to judges and we said, judges, look at these. We've got these world-class experts saying, whoa, halt. They were just not doing their job, in my opinion, and said they couldn't decide, they couldn't figure it out, so they deferred to the executive branch agencies. This is all relevant to being a doctor and a lawyer, because last summer, the Supreme Court has pulled away from the executive branch agency deferrals that judges acquiesced to. There was a very important case called Inloper Bright, where the Supreme Court reversed 40 or 50 years of judges just deferring to the executive branch agencies. It wasn't the NIH or the CDC, but other executive branch agencies. Judges had been given permission in their mind. Oh, you know, the executive branch agency, unelected bureaucrat, said to do this. I'm just going to do that. Well, that's what we were coming up against in COVID. We were asking the judges, in retrospect, here's these world-class, amazing physicians saying, whoa, halt. But over here's the NIH and the CDC saying, give it.
Yeah.
And the judges were just deferring to the agencies.
Yeah.
Okay, but we have some hope in America because a few months ago in June of 24, in Loper Bright Enterprises, the Supreme Court held that judges were giving too much deference to executive branch agencies, and that's unconstitutional, and they have to adjudicate fairly. They can't just say the unelected bureaucrats are correct. They can't pass the buck. It's a very important legal decision.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Do you think that will have an effect?
I think it will change the landscape slowly going forward. I didn't understand that so much legally when I was bringing the lawsuits in 21 and 22, that part of the reason judges were so reluctant to believe independent physicians is that the judges had been trained, lulled into thinking their job was to just go with what the executive branch agency said. That was ripped up.
Well, that'd be convenient
this summer.
if it was possible.
Exactly. But that's not our system. The judges are supposed to be independent. So that actually, it was called the Chevron Doctrine, and it was thrown out. And thank God it's been 50 years and it's been thrown out. So going forward, bringing lawsuits, the judges can no longer hide behind the FDA said this, or for example, the EPA said that, right?
So that'll have effect there too, Environmental Protection
Agency. The judge has to adjudicate looking at the evidence, not just give, the
well, that's
Supreme Court
well-timed
said
for the new
it was well-timed.
administration.
Undue deference. He said they were giving undue deference.